something that I think a lot of us have had on our mind, which is the free speech thing and the kind of dichotomy that Elon Musk represents, because he comes out and talks about how he's for free speech, but it's very clear he's for free speech on his terms. And I will say that of all the social platforms, Twitter's probably the best, the most free. But listen to what Maajid here has to say, because he makes a couple of great points that I want to discuss with y'all. So here's the first one with him talking about Elon.
Based online at that stage, like Elon Musk is, and you're tweeting. If you look up Elon Musk on Twitter and search term Civil War UK, you'll see how many times he has goaded the concept, including saying things like it's inevitable. But what really?
Okay, so let's check that out. Let's see if he's telling the truth here. Let's see if Elon Musk is as big of a civil war advocate as we think he is. Here's the search. Elon Musk, Civil War UK. Elon Musk says Europe appears to be headed for civil war over this footage showing a fight between two groups in London. Okay, so that's not Elon Musk saying that, but Elon Musk warns civil war is inevitable. Oh, okay. Europe is heading towards civil war, Elon Musk. This was clear several years ago. Interesting. Elon Musk sudden interest in UK affairs should concern all who've been paying attention. He's stirring the pot. All right, that's fair. So Maajid, not fabricating here. Let's get back to what he's saying.
Me is beyond the pale. Is it in the middle of these roaming lynch mobs torching hotels with humans inside them? He's on his platform with millions and millions of followers, tens of millions, goading civil war in the UK. And it's not just...
So, okay, this is where I get a little bit skeptical, because as he's going to explain later on, there are forces that benefit from conflict like this. And what he just said, he said people torching hotels with immigrants in them. Let's go back just a couple seconds.
Goading civil war in the UK. And it's not tens of millions goading civil war with humans inside them. What really, for me, is beyond the pale is it in the middle of these roaming lynch mobs torching hotels with humans inside them. He's on his platform with millions and millions of followers.
So I didn't know much about this, so I want to show you. I looked up this article. This is about a guy, a fascist guy who tried to torch a hotel in London. So man sentenced to 9 years in prison following far-right riot at hotel in England. A man who helped fuel a fire outside a hotel housing more than 200 asylum seekers was sentenced Friday to 9 years in prison, the longest punishment handed so far to those involved in last month's wave of far-right riots in England. So this is a real thing. At the sentencing hearing, Sheffield Crown Court in the north of England, painter and decorator Thomas Briley pleaded guilty to the charge of arson with the intent to endanger life at Holiday Inn Express Hotel in nearby Rotherham last month. Judge Jeremy Richardson told Briley, 27, this case was unquestionably one of the most serious of the dozens he has dealt with in the past month. In relation to the rioting outside the hotel, August 4th, he said he needed to pass an extended sentence due to Briley's danger to the public and ordered that when he is eventually released, he should be on license for 5 years, meaning that if he reoffends, he would be able to go back to prison. So something that stuck out to me here, the judge says this case was unquestionably one of the most serious of the dozens he's dealt with. So keep that in the back of your head there. Briley, who has previous convictions, including for racially aggravated harassment, admitted arson with intent to endanger life, violent disorder, possession of an offensive weapon at a previous hearing. Overall, the judge said that, like the other outbreaks of violence in England, the case around the attack on the hotel was sufficed with racism. The court heard how the masked Briley was involved in many of the worst incidents on that Sunday afternoon, including adding wood to the fire in a bin that had been pushed against an exit and helping place a further bin on top of the one ablaze. Briley was also filmed throwing projectiles at the police, squaring up to officers while brandishing a police baton and throwing a large bin that crashed into a line of police with riot shields. How dare he? How dare he? He was the first person to be sentenced for arson with intent to endanger life following 12 hours of violence outside the hotel that left 64 police officers, 3 horses, and a dog injured. You intended that the occupants of the hotel should come to a very serious harm, and you plainly participated in a brutal attack upon the police who were bravely trying to keep order, the judge said. You were a leading participant in an ignorant racist attempt at mob rule in what must have clearly been a terrifying experience for everyone inside the hotel. The judge heard how 22 staff, thinking they were going to burn to death, barricaded themselves in a panic room with freezers. The asylum seekers, many of whom were seen watching the mob from outside their windows, were unable to leave despite fire alarms that were ringing. Eventually, the police brought the situation under control, and no one in the hotel was injured. So no one was injured, and this guy's obviously a scumbag for doing that. But that's the story. I kind of wanted to just really get myself caught up on what's going on here, because until I saw this video, I was kind of unaware, blissfully unaware of a lot of, I've heard stories about it, but I didn't know how bad it's gotten. Now, with all this stuff that's been going on in the United States with the far right protests, the guys in masks that march and stuff, this kind of stuff makes me suspicious. And I'm not saying that, this guy should be in jail. The stuff he did is horrible. He's obviously a racist if he's trying to hurt, but these kind of stories. I mean, I shouldn't say he's obviously a racist because I don't know the full story, but I feel like these kind of stories are conveniently ramping up. And let me just let Maajid
was tens of millions
this path,
goading civil war in the UK. And it's not just, this is not something we can put down to trolling or, oh, look how funny it is. This is like her, edgy online talk. And basically while he's scratching his ass in his bedroom. These were families. And so when you get to that point, it's no wonder Parliament's...
So it's, it's terrifying that happened, but also no one was hurt. No one was even injured. People were scared. And to me, that's kind of the point of something like this. I don't know, I don't want to go into conspiracy theory territory, but I'll just let Maajid finish because he completes the circle nicely.
Summoned him to speak. Now, obviously, we understand Parliament is itself as a cesspit full of corrupt warmongers and Blairites currently in power. That's not in defense of Starmer and his Ukraine warmongering or whatever. That's not in defense of that. What we're talking.
So it's interesting because it seems like the rest of the world has like the same kind of political dynamics that the USA has. And I think that's with good reason, especially in Europe, Western Europe. I'll shut up and let him continue.
Talking about here is, of course, there's a bigger thing, there's a bigger game at play here. And if you've got somebody as influential a voice as him, with a platform as powerful as his, which is ultimately what I described on Rogan 1780, is a weapon, we've now seen how it's been weaponized. So if anyone...
Okay, let's pause right here for a second, because this is one of the things that to me is a little bit scary. He's calling social media a weapon. So Twitter, YouTube could be a weapon. This is a weapon. But also, wait a minute, like, what is the corporate media then? That's a weapon too. No one spreads more disinformation and bullshit than the corporate media. So the idea that like Twitter is a weapon for individuals, I guess if you would, it's not a weapon, it's a piece of media, or it's a media platform that can be, people don't have to listen to you. People can block you. It's wild to call this a weapon because it's the damage that it inflicts is kind of like something that people bring upon themselves. It's like calling spoons weapons, when gun people are like, oh, spoons kill people because they die of heart disease. It's kind of a bit of a jump.
Goes back to my conversation with Rogan 1780, you'll see me use the word weapon to describe Twitter. I still call it Twitter because I'm not subject to his whims,
I'm with him on that.
It's whimsical, right? Whimsical X. What does he think he is? Malcolm X. But basically, the way that platform's been weaponized, you can see it. So when he recently did the thing with Brazil, and they've banned his platform. Again, this isn't to say, let's ban speech. This is to say, why should I defend you now in the name of free speech, when what you're effectively doing, Mr. Musk, is the equivalent of what Tony Blair did when he said, let's invade Iraq to defend democracy. Like, let's be a bit careful here. Like, you're weaponizing our values to defend free speech where you want us to. Since when did he criticize Israel? So he's all over Brazil at the moment, and he wants us to jump in the name of free speech to defend him. Since when has he criticized Netanyahu? Instead, he went there.
And this is where homie won me over, because, and again, these are such nuanced debates. You can't, it's a complicated scenario, right? It's like, I don't think Elon Musk is a savior of free speech any more than I think Donald Trump is. However, the limited political choices that we have, the Democrat and the Republican choices, between those two mainstream choices, viable choices, it's pretty clear which one is the lesser of the two evils at the moment. And I mean, that goes for like Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg too. And, Elon Musk and even TikTok, who's being completely manipulated.
When he was summoned, I've got a piece on my Substack called Kneel Before Zod. And it's basically
Superman.
Musk was summoned by Netanyahu, who is Zod, right? And kneeled before him. And did the whole kind of photo op thing with cradles and, where are the dead babies? The Jewish Chronicle, I've just published, I just posted it. The Guardian, Sunday Guardian is the Observer in the UK. The Guardian just wrote a piece today because the Sunday Times wrote a piece about it. Their investigation exposed it yesterday, that the Jewish Chronicle in the UK, the oldest Jewish newspaper in the world, has had to sack one of their hired columnists for putting out fabricated pieces about the Gaza war, right? So
when I listened to this, he said it's had to sack one of their fabricated columnists. I thought he said colonists.
A lot of propaganda has been revealed, fake news has been published by outlets, including the Jewish Chronicle, and Musk has been there at their beck and call when Netanyahu summoned him. Here is the headline: Crisis at Jewish Chronicle as stories based on wild fabrications are withdrawn, right? That's in the Sunday Guardian, the Observer, because the Sunday Times, another reputable but obviously with criticism UK corporatist news outlet, exposed what was going on.
See, I like this guy. He that's the thing. There are areas here where I think he might be kind of missing the point a little bit, or maybe, I think for me, it's just like my default position is skepticism and like, what's the agenda behind this? And so I don't think he's being as skeptical of these like right-wing protests in Europe as I might be of the ones here, because it does seem like, and we're going to show you some examples of this in a minute, anyone who is against the establishment is instantly a right-wing, pro-Russia, anti-vax, the list.
So my point with Musk is, we're not going to fall for the same. We say in there's a tradition in Arabic, Muslim tradition, al-mu'minu la yuldaghu min juhrin marratain. Yeah, a believer in the oneness is not bitten or stung from the same lizard hole twice. So you did that before, like under the guise of Tony Blair, let's defend democracy and invade Iraq. Now it's about defend free speech and work with Musk, to weaponize that against the countries he wants. So I'm not interested in defending Brazil's banning of speech. I'm interested in saying, why should I stand with you, Musk? Because you're no different. You're on the other end of that dialectic, weaponizing speech for your own purposes. And what we saw with the riots in the UK is a case in point. Ultimately.
So, okay, I just want to stop here for a second, because this is my take on this stuff. This is what it looks like to me for entertainment purposes only. A lot of this is based on my own research and hunches. And, I don't live in Europe, so I can't, if you're in Europe, maybe you can educate me in the comments, but this is what it looks like to me. I'm not saying that there aren't real like right-wingers in Britain, in Germany. I just saw a story about Sweden and Denmark embassies, Israeli embassies being firebombed. This seems like an op to me. This seems like, and this guy is falling for it. He's like, oh, like free speech is fine for Musk in Brazil, but in Europe, he's trying to incite a civil war. Well, people that are tweeting violent things, you have a documentation. And the difference between Europe and here is they don't have a First Amendment in Europe. Gavin Newsom, for example, just I was going to cover this, but I didn't want to go too far down this hole. But Gavin Newsom recently passed a bill in California to try and prevent deep fakes, and the court shot it down because it's. And when you look at the video that they're trying, that the law was based on, it's clearly a partisan thing. You know, the video itself is clearly satirical. You know, the Kamala Harris video, I think Jimmy Dore and Dudisons and all of them played it. But let's keep going with Maajid here.
If there are ongoing riots in any country, then the only civilized response is to ask for calm, is not to encourage people.
I agree. But also, Elon Musk is not a world leader. He's a media mogul now. He's a mogul with a media platform. So the idea that, like, I think the point he's kind of trying to make here is he's trying to square, like, he's definitely legit, though, because he's saying, you know, Elon Musk is clearly not for free speech, and here's a clear example of where he's not. But also, it seems like he's advocating for censorship because these, like, right-wing protests in Europe are scaring him. So he's like, well, we got to censor these guys. And because Elon Musk is a hypocrite about Israel, that should be okay. And I think maybe in Europe, it's fine. Like, Europe doesn't have a First Amendment. That's the difference between our countries.
To burn down buildings with live humans in them.
I think it was Kim Iverson. He said, what do they have? Like a deal with the crown or something, or like some kind of a pact with the crown.
Smash up mosques with families praying in them, like lynch mobs literally outside mosques, yeah? Of course, then you wonder why a whole bunch of Muslim black shirts came out.
Of course.
Right? So what do you think was going to happen? So, you know, my point is, if you're going to be critical of the BLM riots and say, look at these mostly, you know, the whole mostly peaceful.
Mostly peaceful.
Right? And you've got pictures of burning buildings behind you and a CNN reporter saying mostly peaceful. You're doing the same thing. I understand there's a difference between peaceful protesters who oppose immigration and support, for example, the Reform Party, right? I understand that they and Farage and others wouldn't want anything to do with the likes of Stephen Yaxley Lennon. They've made that clear. Farage left UKIP over that point and said, I refuse. So
this is where he kind of gets into some British politics that I'm not super familiar with, but this is kind of what I gathered. And I'm going to play this clip of him talking about it. It looks like a similar dynamic is occurring in the UK, and people in the UK that see this, please correct me where I'm wrong, or educate me. You know, like, I don't claim to be an expert on this whatsoever, but based on what Maajid here is saying, it looks like there is a similar kind of populist split in the UK and Germany, where just like there is here, you know, the people are like, hey, we want our sovereignty. We want to, like, spend our money here instead of dumping it into foreign wars. And that's starting to break out in Europe, and as well as it's been breaking out here for a long time. And that's what the Trumpism thing is, kind of the Make America Great Again thing. And so in Europe, it's starting to happen. And since they don't have a First Amendment, you're going to see these types of, like, hyped up protests where they're like, oh, they tried to kill immigrants, we have to shut down social media, because it's going to be much easier to achieve that in the UK and Germany because they don't have a First Amendment and a court that will go, nope, that's a violation of free speech. So this is the thing, the part of it, I think, that Maajid kind of misses a little bit. But he did educate me a little bit on European politics here, and he goes into the weeds a little bit more. So this is one more clip from this that's really good.
Okay, they think Stephen, stage name Tommy Robinson, and Farage are in the same camp. And because they're in the US, they just think it's all Trumpism in the UK. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, stage name Tommy Robinson, and Nigel Farage. What they don't realize is the reason Nigel Farage left his own party, UKIP, the banner under which he campaigned for Brexit for such a long time, most people still know him as UKIP, right? And founded the Brexit Party, and then founded Reform. There's three stages to this. Why did he do that? He left UKIP because Gerard Batten basically adopted stage name Tommy Robinson, as an advisor, and started taking UKIP in the anti-Muslim direction. Farage quit. That's in The Guardian. Anyone can look it up. Go and search online, Nigel Farage leave.
So that sounds like, because Nigel Farage is one of the UK guys who was against the Ukraine thing. So that sounds like an infiltration, like MI6 infiltrated that party and started making it anti-Muslim on purpose so they could hang that around Nigel Farage's neck. And listen, we've seen this before with Jeremy Corbyn. They did that exact same playbook on Jeremy Corbyn. They do it on they did it on Tulsi Gabbard here. They did it on Bernie Sanders here. They do it on Trump here. Anyone who pushes back on the war machine is a racist. And so in Europe, it's much easier, I think, to manufacture this kind of realistic outrage. Maybe there's people that are easier to switch, but in the case of Europe, of course, they're going to, you've seen it. The push is everywhere. Hillary Clinton and John Kerry have been on TV advocating for the shutdown of social media. But in Europe, they can really make it stick with this kind of stuff. So that's my theory for entertainment purposes only. People in Europe, UK, Germany, correct me if you think I'm off about that, because I don't know the nuance of your politics. I just know it through the lens of American politics, which it looks like is kind of bleeding out into Western Europe.
UKIP, and you'll see a big headline over anti-Muslim bigotry. Then what happens? There's the very recent leader of UKIP, literally the one that was just there, left again.
Is that the lady?
Yeah. Left over Tommy Robinson.
Yeah.
Stage name, Tommy Robinson, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, right? Right? Because, again, and did an interview saying there's no...
So I don't even know who Tommy Robinson is, but it sounds like he's kind of one of the far-right extremists that's rising in UK politics. And again, it's suspiciously odd that, this is happening now as the anti-war sentiment kind of reaches a crescendo.
No way I can stand as leader of UKIP when they're pushing us to go towards the kind of anti-Islam direction. So there's an internal debate among the right in the UK right now about this, because nobody wants riots who understands what's going on in the UK. Nobody wants the civil discord. So then the question becomes, who does? Who does want it? Mm-hmm. And
this right here, listen closely, because this is where, all these arguments I've been making against him, I think this is where he totally gets it and just nails it all down to perfection.
Brings us to, some interesting, I'm happy to go into as much detail as you want, but some interesting patterns behind the voices that recently emerged that have been promoting Yaxley Lennon, stage name Tommy Robinson, while he was goading all of these recent riots. And those voices have one thing in common. They've all been summoned by Zod. They have. So Jordan Peterson, who's been promoting Yaxley Lennon, stage name Tommy Robinson, at least Jordan uses his real name. He's been obviously, he's at the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro. That's a very well-known pro-Likudnik, which is Netanyahu's party, Likudnik outfit, right? So when you start...
Yeah, we've definitely gone into the weeds about what a unapologetic Zionist Ben Shapiro is, to the point where it makes him have to do mental gymnastics to pretend he's not against things he passionately believed like 6 months ago, well, a year ago.
Looking at that, Musk was summoned by Zod himself, the head of the entire Likudnik phenomenon, Netanyahu. So whether it's Musk, whether it's Peterson, you can start recognizing that one thing they all have in common, those that have been goading and agitating for communalism and sectarianism in the UK, they all have one thing in common, and that is they are pro-Gaza war and pro-Likudnik policy in Israel, led by Netanyahu. And that's where, again, the Times, the UK Times, exposed this all. I was saying it for a long time on Radical Media, on my Substack.
So that's interesting that Canadian outlet Rebel News, they've done some really good work too. They did some really good work on the WEF and stuff, but they're very, very pro-Israel. This is what has been coined now, the woke right. These people who are like suddenly calling everyone a racist to defend the war in Gaza, who 5 minutes ago were laughing at trans people for wanting safe spaces. Those people, that's Jordan Peterson, that's Ben Shapiro, that's anyone that's part of this Likudnik-backed network of independent media on the right. And what he's saying is they're suspiciously pushing these kind of figures in Europe who are very divisive, because just like they did with Hamas, if they create a threat, then the threat has to be addressed, regardless of how real the threat is. If you live in the United States, think 9/11.
and that is that there were Likudnik, Netanyahu interests behind these divide and conquer policies. And again, the UK Times, with my criticisms of corporate media, did an expose on the funding behind Yaxley Lenin, and it revealed that all of the funding sources come from pro-Likudnik backers. Rebel Media, I know all these guys personally, by the way, because I have a personal history with Stephen, having helped him once upon a time leave the EDL, which again, happy to go into, and all the story behind that. But my idea at the time was to try and help end what was at the time Europe's largest anti-Islam street protest movement. And by removing its leader, some in the media from our organization at the time, unfortunately, used the phrase decapitated, which he didn't like because he felt it was a bit jihadist. But somebody said we decapitated the EDL. That's perhaps an unfortunate use of phrase. But yeah, remove the leader, left it as a headless chicken. Sorry to conjure up images of decapitation again. And as you know, Peter, the EDL has never been the same since in this country. Now it's a one-man band run by Yaxley Lenin. And this recent surge of his kind of, online profile.
The EDL, huh? I wonder if that's related to the ADL. I'm going to have to look that up now. English Defense League is a far-right Islamophobic organization active in England from 2009 until the mid to late 2010s. Okay. So probably one of these Likudnik-backed, insurgencies to make people think that anyone who's a Muslim is anti-Semitic.
Has been aided because of his Twitter account.
So do you believe the goal here is to create anti-Islam, anti-Muslim sentiment in the West as a cover to encourage people to be more supportive of Israel continuing the war in Gaza?
So yes, but more than that. So that's a primary objective, and that is that if you've got...
So I didn't even have to disclaim that as for entertainment purposes only, because he basically just vocalized what I said anyway.
A very large anti-Muslim sentiment across the West, then the funding stream you need to go for Israel's war in Gaza is easier to acquire politically. Now, how, if you think of that by a way of an analogy...
There's a whole book about that called Manufacturing Consent.
You need to generate anti-Russia sentiment to continue the funding stream into Ukraine for that war. You need people to think Putin is a boogeyman, that he's nasty and there's all the dictator, tyrant, for people to be willing to tolerate the fact that we, in the meanwhile, are cutting winter fuel allowance for our elderly, while our successive governments, not just Starmer, but before him, the Tories, have been promising literally unlimited funding for the war in Ukraine. So you've got to generate that sentiment so that the public is pacified to accept the fact that we're going to fund war. So in the case of Ukraine, that's anti-Russia sentiment. In the case of Israel, it's anti-Palestinian sentiment. But of course, there aren't many Palestinians in the West. There are stateless people living in refugee camps. So their strongest supporters in the West are the Muslim diaspora. So you've got to generate an anti-Muslim sentiment to continue, and more than just a fear of Muslims, and generally a fear of migration and brown people, because a lot of our migration was coming from countries that we were involved in wars in, which were Muslim majority countries.
And so hold on.
So there you have it. That is Maajid Nawaz's take on what's going on in Europe. And he has receipts. He has an article on his Substack called Kneel Before Zod that you should go check out. I'll try to remember to put a link to that in the description.